Welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 62 being recorded on November 9, 2022. Today's a holiday. It's International Anti-Fascism and Anti-Semitism Day. Hashtag Day Against Fascism. We're going to look at a story related to that and the Italian government as we get into our grab back of things. Of course, yesterday was the midterm elections in the United States. There were some other elections going on internationally recently this past week as well. So we are going to look at that also. We have a number of stories, a few COVID things. That's not going to be a major feature this week. But we are going to look at some of the election outcomes and what was on people's minds going into the elections, which I think is a bit more interesting than all of the outcomes necessarily because, neither party, the Democrats or Republicans, they basically just keep us in this limbo where they have these insanely reactionary policies, and the U.S. is constantly on the verge of being fully taken over by Republicans, and the Democrats just fundraise off of this. Anyway, it's a horrific situation. There are some direct voting ballot measures. I don't think every state does this, but a lot of the states, they'll put things on the ballot for people to vote on directly, and this has been an engine of a lot of progress, whether it's minimum wage increases or... Anyway, this week, today, we're going to look at several states outlawing prison slavery, several states putting abortion into their state constitutions, and some more states making cannabis legal, which is great because that's a big way that the police state, it's an excuse that they use to lock people up, so we don't want that. And a lot of states now have legalized cannabis fully for, quote, recreational, non-medicinal purposes. Of course, cannabis is medicinal. It's has a number of benefits to it. There are risks as well. Overuse can lead to some psychological impairment, most of which is temporary. But anyway, it's been legalized in a lot of places, and the earth has not stopped turning, not by far. All the scare tactics that were used about it really have been revealed as just that. We'll get into that in more detail. U.S. continues to have that as a Schedule I drug, which is insane. Anyway, and it's not just the U.S., but it is something the U.S. is doing. So, continuing, what else do we have? A little bit of PATSOC stuff, just a little bit. Also, some things on the housing crisis and why rent has gone up. Some things also about organizing the unemployed. I'm not sure which is going to go into today's stream, which is going to go into tomorrow's stream, but we'll pick it up from there. But before we start with anything else, let's go ahead and get into the chat and see what is on the minds of the roughly 24 people who are in the chat early today. And... have I ever heard of the Platypus-affiliated society? Short answer, yes. Continuing. They advertise as a Marxist reading group, but really they're just a group of wreckers. The stated goal by the founder, Chris Cutrone, is to destroy the current, quote, progressive liberal left and replace it with themselves. Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, the stated goal of S4A is to raise the bar of the left. I wouldn't say destroy the current left, but actually not at all. I wouldn't say that at all. It's to raise the bar. It's to improve the left that we have. And not everybody's going to make that transition, but a lot of people will. We want to raise the bar on the U.S. left to be more effectively anti-fascist, more effectively anti-imperialist in the actual socialist sense of that, with an understanding of what imperialism is and not just picking the lesser of two evils in inter-imperialist conflicts, which is a major, I think, demoralizing to watch and witness a stumbling block of even the, quote, Marxist left right now. But raising the bar, getting people to do more of the reading, so more anti-fascist, more anti-imperialist in a really effective, consistent way, and more internationalist, less chauvinist left. So all of these things, less chauvinist in a just purely nationalist sense, as far as national borders, but also more, effectively anti-racist, anti-sexist. All of these things help to underpin capitalism, which is now in the stage of imperialism. So yeah, I mean, we do have to improve the left, but destroying it that's not a good framing at all. and replace it with themselves. Their slogan is "The left is dead, long live the left." That's just masturbatory, and that's not going to win anybody over, I don't think. Seems to be aimed at university students. I came across them with arguing with a left anti-communist. Yeah, I have heard of them. I have looked them up because I've had a number of people over the 2.5 years that I've been doing this channel. And when I say a number, I mean like 3 or 4 maybe, mention the Platypus group. And I looked them up. I think that they're Trotskyists or like Trotskyist adjacent. Yet one more reason I don't like Trots, and I think Trotskyism tends to spawn all kinds of, what eventually turns out to be anti-communist garbage in the end. Whether they have some valid point of criticism about this historical event or that historical event, the movement as a whole leads to garbage in general. So I do not. And there was just somebody whining, Diego, I'm talking about you, in the comments about, they commented on the Lenin on Trotsky file. It was from 1914, not far off from the 1917 revolution. And they're whining about, Lenin, called Trotsky the most trusted guy. You have to understand the entire history of Trotsky, though, and that hour-long file from Lenin is a pretty good basis for understanding Trotsky's vacillations. They're like, oh, well, Trotsky was still not a Bolshevik yet at this point. I mean, but doesn't that in itself speak somewhat badly of Trotsky? I know that he made contributions to the revolution when he finally did become a Bolshevik and all that, but I think that the cult of Trotsky definitely overinflates Trotsky's importance. And then they do the exact same sort of cult of personality that they accuse the, quote, Stalinists of doing. Fucking move on. I don't like Trotskyism at all. The first socialists I really met in real life were Trotskyists. They literally turned me off to socialism for a number of years. So I don't see Trotskyism as being making good contributions. So when you get into sort of left anti-communism, yeah, I don't think the Platypus Society. I haven't heard anybody mention them in like almost a year, so I don't know if their time in the sun is already coming to an end or what, but I don't think that they're very relevant. So yes, I have heard of them though. Another comment, I think I'm going to stop paying attention to the Ukrainian conflict for some time from now on, just the amount of shit I've seen and the hatred, it just isn't good for my mental health. So yeah, I saw all of this coming and called it back in late February, early March. You will not like people cheerleading for war. The first casualty of war is truth, and what we've been drowning in propaganda. Don't pretend that, anything that you're seeing about the war is necessarily accurate. You have to take everything with a grain of salt. Some of it may be accurate, but almost all of it is distorted in some way or another, because once a war starts, the whole goal is just to survive and win. I mean, it truly is high stakes. It's life and death. More than just the life and death of individuals or of groups, you're talking about the entire infrastructure that makes life possible, that supports human life, mass society as we know it, that getting leveled. So war is hell. It's one of the absolute worst things. People cheering it on like it's team sports, just don't know anything about it, aren't taking it seriously, and or are being paid to do so. There's nothing really in war for the average person. This is an inter-imperialist conflict, and we don't take sides in those. The outcome that we want is proletarian revolution on both sides to end the war. We want people not to fight for the bourgeoisie, but to fight against the bourgeoisie. It's happened before. It can happen again. It requires a lot of organizing, and it can be done. So, yeah, it is horrific, though. And as I mentioned, it's been demoralizing for me. I talked about raising the bar for the left, right? It's just, there's a long way to go still. And if people want to have really anti-Marxist, anti-proletarian positions, I mean, people are going to do that. Please stop calling it Marxism, though. You don't need to do that. So anyway. Did I see the Caleb Maupin? Yes, the Spanky Tanky is back. Alleged, basically cult-style sexual exploiter of people in his, quote, political organization. or spanking cult, whatever. Yeah, he's back. It's not good. We'll do a little, like when I said there was a little Pat Sock stuff, yes, we'll do a quick mention of that, because there were also, he put up a video announcing his return that nobody wants. Stay the fuck down. In the first version of the 26, 27-minute video that he put up, he mentioned that there were also rape allegations against Infracell. And then he quickly pulled that and then edited it out and then put that up. There's other stuff too. Apparently Infracell and Samira Khan, both LaRoucheites in this whole Patsock, LaRouche, Dugan, Schiller Institute sphere, they knew about what was going on. According to Infracell, they knew about what was going on and advised to handle it internally. So that's what the church does. That's what every cult does, is tries to handle sexual exploitation internally. No, you don't. Anyway, these people are your absolute enemy. They will endanger your physical and mental health. It's fascism. It's LaRouche. It's Dugan. Stay the fuck away from it. But yeah, we'll run the footage just to get it on record. There were some really good ballot initiatives this time, yes. The ballot initiatives that the reactionary state legislature in Arkansas put up all got voted down. That's good. In Chicago, there was an amendment on the ballot for union protections in Illinois. And that's funny. I see you spelled that with a Y. Was that the spell check, or is that a new thing people are doing? Also, another referendum to increase funding for parks, which the last thing we needed is for real estate moguls to put a bunch of ugly condos where the parks were. Seemed like a no-brainer for 15 minutes of my time. Yeah, these ballot initiatives, where they're allowed, progress is happening despite the Democrats and Republicans, not because of them. And it's always good to get, even if it doesn't get implemented, it's always good to have it on record that the people wanted some reform, wanted some change to the system. You can build momentum off of that. And eventually we need to build a party that is not the Democratic Party to take on both the Democrats and the Republicans. Or, as I say, left coalition, that would work. That way you don't have to form a new party, just put together the existing parties. And the existing parties can continue to exist independently, but they can also come together and join forces as a coalition while still existing as independent entities. That would make the most sense to me. #left coalition. Anyway, legalizing cannabis was one of the best decisions Canada has made. Weed leads to mushrooms, leads to enlightenment. I mean, not always, but just not locking up people for cannabis. There's no reason for it. And again, there is a political reason. They started doing this back at the beginning of the war on drugs under Nixon. And one of Nixon's aides and advisors admitted it was political. It was like they looked at the demographics that most opposed Nixon, and they're like, okay, which of their hobbies and habits can we criminalize? And so there, boom, you got an excuse to lock up your political opponents and claim that it's for public health or something. The fact is that the harms of prison and the harms of having that record and all that life disruption of an arrest and everything, that's far worse for your overall well-being than consuming cannabis. And if you are going to consume cannabis, I would say smoke is not good for you, whether it's cannabis or not. Do edibles. But, if you're going to do it, I would advise people against smoking anything. It's not good for your lungs, especially when there is a pandemic like COVID going around. But, yeah, I mean, people don't always, let's not fall into like gateway drug stuff here. Not that mushrooms are, a quote, hard drug, which actually Colorado did just legalize other plant-based psychedelics, which is awesome. Because, which would you rather have, an epidemic of like fentanyl and, like bathtub meth, or mushrooms? I mean, it's obvious, would you rather have the plant that like leads you to experience your soul's vision, or would you rather have something that makes your teeth fall out and like makes you, eat your neighbor's cat or whatever? So yeah. I tire of rich guys telling me what to think. Yeah, Elon Musk was out in force talking about, well, there's a Democratic president right now. So to balance the excesses of both parties, you should vote for a Republican candidates for the House and whatever. And it's just like, don't get your political advice from the world's richest man or really anyone in the 1% ever. Ever. Somebody says, yeah, the platypus affiliated society seems to be a mix of Trotskyists and Patsocks. So in other words, garbage. I've known one Trot, and he said Trotsky was more important than Lenin to the Russian Revolution. Yeah, definitely no cult of personality going on there. It's like they're still stuck in the 1930s, and they can't get over, the injustices done to my man Trotsky. Move on, move on. It's totally ridiculous, and I find them to be, on the whole, extraordinarily sectarian. If you have criticisms of the USSR from the mid 30s to the like the rest of Stalin's time, fine, have your criticisms, but it does not mean you need to become a Trotskyist. Anti-communism is probably the biggest reason why not enough people are Marxist. I mean, yes, I think that goes without saying. Only with comrades like Finbald did I realize that basically everything said about actually existing socialist countries is wrong. Yeah, I mean, I went through that too. I went through a phase of believing, communists were really scary and everything else. And eventually I, came across enough information. For me, it kind of started with learning more of the history of the labor movement. And then I eventually got into, the labor movement was hugely important for a lot of the changes that we saw in the USA. And then getting to stepping back another level of also the international communist movement and all of that also helped bring out the most militant elements of the labor movement, etc. So yeah, but it takes time for some people because I'm a little older than some of the audience, and I grew up under a bit more of that Cold War atmosphere. So I got hit with a little bit more of that, and the people that I grew up around, that was sort of considered common sense to the boomers and, even the generation older than the boomers. So it was that's sort of the environment that people took for granted. And yeah, it takes some time to unlearn that. I think people today, young people today, you have to contend with less of that. I mean, there's trying to start up a Cold War with Russia and China again in the U.S. and those countries. I mean, Russia is definitely not socialist, and a lot of people, about half of the people who listen to this channel would contend that China is not socialist either. So, as far as it, being a statement on communism, it's something of a stretch. So anyway, what did the Trotskyist group do to piss me off? The one that turned me off to socialism? They were extraordinarily sectarian, and I was doing anti-war work in the 2000s, and there were a lot of groups coming to that anti-war coalition, and there was a Trotskyist group, and just everything about the way they operated, it was divisive, rubbed people the wrong way, alienating, and yeah, so. Have I been following the protests in Iran? Not closely. It just has not been crossing my stream that much. Alcohol is in many ways worse than weed, hands down. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, cannabis not habit forming. Um, the basic, the risks of it. Excessive use can lead to temporary psychosis. Like, if you're really using heavy amounts daily, it can lead to kind of a blurring of, mental disorder, basically, blurring of reality and fantasy, if you will, various things. But that's really with heavy, heavy chronic use. And there's, some other sort of rare physical syndromes you can get into with extreme amounts of use, which, to be fair, are possible with some of the edible forms. You have to be really, really careful about that. A lot of the edibles are sold in doses that most people legit cannot handle. I mean, if you were trying it for the first time, literally take 1 or 2 milligrams and just start with that. A lot of the baseline doses are like 10 milligrams. That will, get a lot of people like seriously zonked when people need about a quarter of that to start. So yeah, I mean, be really careful with it. But and I think also chronic use has been linked to decreased gray matter. But again, these are like really heavy uses, and alcohol does all of this and worse. Alcohol also notoriously habit forming, also causes depression. So there were studies of depression in, I think it was male alcoholics, and in every case, the drinking preceded the depression. So the drinking causes the depression. Alcohol has destroyed so many lives. Cannabis, it's just not even close. Not even close. So that said, I mean, it's not for everybody. This is not, everybody needs to run out and do cannabis. No. But for those who do want to do it, far, far safer for the most part than alcohol, which has been legal for, a huge amount of time. Yeah, safest was psilocybin on a study of overall safety of drugs. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. The thing is, like, nobody wants to do psilocybin daily, you know what I mean? And that's, if you look at traditional uses of these things, it was, taken under pretty specific circumstances. I mean, tightly controlled enough to be referred to as like ritual or ceremony type circumstances. And it was done with specific sort of psychological or spiritual goals in mind. And, it's not the sort of just, I'll have a drink, recreational type of thing. So, I mean, I think that some of that culture needs to be understood as far as like safe use. But yeah, I mean, it's not the kind of thing where people are going to be just. There are people who abuse psychedelics for sure, but most people are not going to want to do that. Anyway, somebody else says my introduction to the Platypus Society was through Chris Critrone's appearances on former Zero Books editor Doug Lane's podcast. That guy, I tried to listen to a couple of videos on the Zero Books channel, and I was just like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? It was just sort of, I couldn't make sense of what he was saying. It was like going nowhere. And I think I tried several videos, and I had the exact same experience with all of them. So anyway, I'm glad Zero Books came back into the other group's hands, as the quality of Lane's output was seriously declining, in my opinion. Yeah, I don't know if that was the guy I saw, but I mean, it was really just, I'm like, what is this guy babbling about? Yeah, doctors used to smoke in hospitals. Science did a good job of linking smoking tobacco with lung cancer. Also, a lot of activism, and it has become understood to be very dangerous. Also understand the public health system in the United States is terrible, borderline non-existent. We can see that with COVID. And it's like there's a virus going around that causes in 1 in 6 people, maybe 1 in 5 people, serious long-term consequences, including increased risk of death in the following year. And they can't get any mandates going. So understand that, and the tobacco and alcohol lobbies having as much money as they have to maintain their hegemony. But anyway, now the link is very strong for alcohol and cancer, yes, but it's not as neat like stomach cancer or kidney or liver cancer or pancreas, etc. But it increases your risk for any number of this stuff. Yeah, well, alcohol is a broadly bioactive molecule. I mean, you put it in your body, it's not as something as specific as a cannabinoid or a classical psychedelic like a psilocybin molecule or something, where it has like fairly specific effects on the brains. Alcohol, it just sort of pickles you in many different ways, depresses central nervous system activity, and depresses all kinds of normal activity that needs to be going on in your body. I actually didn't even hear, quote, you're only voting third party because you're white male, etc., like the privilege thing. I actually did not, maybe I was just not talking to the right people, but I actually didn't hear that once this midterm. The response, the commenter is saying it should be, you don't live in a country that gets constantly fucked with. I mean, even then, um, the Democrats are part of the system that, what was, I was just writing something about this. So, yeah, I was tweeting last night. I just want to take this moment of relative jubilation for left liberals to remind you that literally the second that the rich need to tighten up their system again, they will throw out all of the progress you think you won today in a heartbeat. The only solution is abolishing capitalism. And this goes for the stuff I was just saying are good steps forward. The thing is, um, Democrats would rather lose elections than ally with the left to stamp out the Republicans. That's why the U.S. is constantly teetering on the edge of GOP takeover. Like every election, it's democracy's in danger, etc. It's because the Dems' wealthy paymasters also fund the GOP, and they need to keep the center of political dialogue between their two puppet parties. That's what the whole focus of the system is. It's about, because if the Democrats allied with the left, we could together do broad popular reforms and make the case for those. And I mean, they're already broadly popular, but making the case and selling it to another 15 or 20% of the country, it would crush. People's lives would improve. We would actually start to assert counterpower against the people running the system. The Republicans could be crushed and sent into just being a regional party with no hold over national U.S. politics. But then what? Then the Democrats and the left, that becomes the primary contradiction and in the political system. And then the Democrats have to contend with the left as competitors. So, you know, the former allies against the Republicans become the competitors. And that's the last thing that the people who fund both Democrats and Republicans want. So they would rather lose election after election and keep the system constantly teetering on the edge of Republican takeover rather than have the left become valid competitors. And that's where we're at, and that's where we've been forever in the system. And yeah, I mean, anyway. When he says, I use cannabis as an alternative to my ADD medication, it helps me more without making me feel like the walls are closing in on me. That's great. Me drinking, kicked out of university, me smoking cannabis, back to back 4.0 GPA. Congrats. You know, for some people it really works. For some people, you know, they don't like it, but yeah. If anything, we should definitely incentivize people to not drink alcohol. I'm a staunch anti-alcohol, anti-alcoholism in particular. I mean, there are people who can drink a responsible amount. On the whole, alcohol is enormously destructive relative to the amount of use. Like even normal use really has. And this actually goes for, I've had this article kicking around forever. Maybe it's time to actually read it. Was reading an article about how health effects of alcohol are actually worse for younger people. Like people under 40 really should not drink at all. Once you get over 40, I think it is, some of the health risks of drinking alcohol go down. But for especially people in their teens and 20s, you should not drink at all, basically. It substantially increases your health risks in a lot of different ways. Um, Ex-partner of mine drank herself to death. She was under 40. Somebody else says, I'm raising my stepdaughter. Her mom died of alcoholism at 27. Yeah. It didn't work for me. Alcohol is one of the worst psychoactive substances by a mile. But yeah, it's, again, if people, if this is part of their thing, they have a drink a few nights a week, like, fine. It's still not good for you, but, people getting into heavier drinking, it's honestly one of the most destructive things you can do to yourself, and it will just drag you down in every conceivable way. And then, you won't realize it until you're several years into it, and then it will take you maybe twice as long to get out of it and sort of rebuild yourself. So yeah. Same experience with zero books. Like I'd hear a minute or two of profound points, then just noise. I can't tell if it's incoherent or if I haven't read enough theory to keep up with. A lot of it seemed like gibberish to me, so I don't think it was you. All right. Let us get into some of today's specialized content, moving on from the chat. So let's start with the grab bag. And where did my thing go? All right, let's really start with the grab bag now. And starting with one of the free libraries got kicked offline. Let me get my thing here. Hopefully I have everything. Yeah, so Z-Library, zlib, is offline, got seized by the feds. I understand that they still have their servers, but they don't have the domain name. So for people who don't know, LibGen is still there, and you can do some research on this. A lot of people use this for textbooks and things, so that they don't wind up spending as much on textbooks as they do on tuition if you're a student. Otherwise, I think that this kind of thing is invaluable. You can get digital backups of books that you have, and so on. But yeah, one of the major sites fronts got taken down this week. So RIP zlib, unfortunately. Although zlib had downsides. For example, they had like a daily limit on how much you could download and things like that. But still, it was an in for some people to realize that there are people leading the resistance on books being, we're in the internet age now. Things like archive.org exist, and they're not just about archiving web pages. They also do movies and music and books and things. But a lot of their books a few years ago got put into this system where it's more like a library. Like you have to have some special thing to, check out the book for a week instead of just downloading it. Whatever. We're really going to have to step around this eventually as a society, because this stuff isn't going away. Piracy isn't going away. None of it's going away. You have things like paid streaming services now. For example, movies. But for a while, those seemed like a really great deal because you could subscribe to one or two services and get all these movies, which of course were over on the torrent sites in the first place. But they were like, well, here, at least pay something, and then you can get these movies, quote, legally. And now all the streaming services, they're breaking back up again. Like every cable channel has its own, hey, pay $9.99 a month, and it's like suddenly you're paying $80 a month for streaming of this thing that basically arose to combat torrenting and stuff like that. Anyway, we're going to have to contend with this as a society. Now, the problem, there's like a famous, semi-famous Matt Damon clip where he's talking about why movies aren't getting made today that were getting made in the past. And he says it has a lot to do with funding. Used to be things would come out in the theaters, they would make a certain amount of money, then it would come out on DVD, and they would make more money selling the DVD. And they're not getting that second bump now, so a lot of the movies that were getting made in the 90s or the 2000s can't be made anymore because they're not going to make their money back. This is a clip of him talking on that Hot Wings challenge show, whatever the name of it is. And so he's basically eating like spicy hot wings and talking about some material analysis of, why the movie industry has changed. So if we want the arts to continue in this way, obviously there are things like Patreon and stuff like that going on now, but you can already see the funding starting to change for this stuff because distribution is moving to more of like a free model, and it's impacting basically anything that can be digitized is being digitized and being put out there for free by somebody. And again, this is something we're going to have to incorporate. Part of the need for socialism arising, capitalism is becoming increasingly obsolete. Politically, though, workers still need to organize to take state power and make our social systems and social expectations and the state and the use of force back up where things are actually at now. It's a different world. Anyway, second piece out of the grab bag, Reuters journalists, unionized, have recently authorized a strike. This is as of November 4. The union has clashed with the company on pay and their return to office policy during the pandemic. So they have voted, they're not definitely striking, but the vote that they have done would allow for a strike to occur. So if they don't get what they want, they've already paved the way for striking. So anyway, that's somewhat inspiring. Also in strike news, there is another strike. So this is 48,000 academic workers at the University of California have set a strike date for November 14. Let's read the press release. UC-ULP, that's unfair labor practice, strike date set for November 14. Quote, after months at the bargaining table and 26 unfair labor practices filed, we have no choice but to move towards a strike, said Jade Moore, a postdoc and bargaining team member. So out of Berkeley, California, tens of thousands of academic workers across all 10 campuses of the University of California will walk off the job and onto the picket line on Monday, November 14, unless the university stops its unlawful conduct so that meaningful progress can be made at the bargaining table. UAW represents 48,000 postdocs, academic student employees, graduate student researchers, and academic researchers at UC, who together power UC's research and academic mission. They perform the vast majority of teaching, grading, and research at UC. And remember, all these companies that, like a Tesla or whatever, many companies, they use publicly funded research in their privatized for-profit products. If you don't have the research coming out of these university systems, this is where the actual knowledge and innovation is happening. I mean, yeah, the companies will find some applications for it and they will take it that sort of last step of the way. But all of this stuff comes out of basically, public research, a lot of it anyway. Some of it is in-house, but anyway. After months of growing frustration over UC's unlawful conduct thwarting progress at the tables over key issues, workers voted overwhelmingly to authorize their bargaining teams to call a statewide strike. Each bargaining unit is prepared to strike in response to the university's unlawful behavior and in solidarity with the other academic workers. Late last night, the bargaining teams all decided to proceed with a strike on November 14, unless UC ceases its unlawful conduct in order to reach fair contracts before then. Quote, too many people are being forced out of UC because they aren't paid enough to afford the rising cost of housing on or off campus, said Maido, a bargaining team member of UAW 2865. Quote, I've had to take on credit card debt while working at UC just to cover my necessities because over 60% of my salary is spent on rent alone. When workers like me are being paid $27,000 a year, wow, that's crazy. We cannot just wait around for the university to change course and stop their unlawful conduct. We have no choice but to move towards a strike. Good for you. Our hope is that the university remedies its unfair labor practices so that we can reach fair agreements before November 14, said Ahmed Akhtar, a bargaining team member of Student Researchers United, UAW. We will do everything in our power to make that happen, but there are over 35,000 workers who voted in favor of strike authorization and are prepared to strike if necessary in order to hold UC accountable and ultimately move us forward as a stronger institution. Visit fairucnow.org for details on strike planning. So that's great. You've got, 50,000 almost workers who are getting ready to flex their power. And this is how things happen. I mean, unions are not just about, let me rephrase, unions are primarily about building worker power. Worker power is then used for things like, getting better conditions and getting better pay and all those sort of obvious immediate concerns. Taken far enough, it can be used to gain control over production and as a launching pad into socialist rebellion and revolution. But the point is building worker power. Right now in the system, capitalists are the most organized, they have the power, and things revolve around their interests. The point that we're trying to do of our organizing is to build worker power so that we can flip this and become not just a counterpower, but the dominant power. and to flip the system towards us so that the proletariat rules society and, abolishes all the remnants of the bourgeoisie's rule. But, that's what it's about, is building worker power. So continuing along the same lines, there's a discussion of, what if Twitter workers were to get into this. Actually, I don't know where I put that screenshot, but basically Boots Riley, you may know, has done some movies recently, is a communist, was talking about, these Elon Musk got in, laid off like 75% of the staff. Well, now, amazingly, so they got fired on Friday, and then a lot of the people got emails like, hey, I know we just fired you. Could you actually come back? What the hell? So here's the story. It appears that Elon Musk may have sacked some of Twitter's workforce too quickly, you think? This past week has seen the social media platform hit with company-wide layoffs, reducing its staff in half, okay, not 3/4, but half, from approximately 7,000 to 3,500 employees. Since then, Twitter has been reaching out to dozens of fired employees and asking them to come back, according to Bloomberg, which cited two sources familiar with the matter. Some of the employees were allegedly laid off by accident in the mass firing. In the case of others, the company realized that their skills were integral to building some of the new features Musk wants to implement. That's just, head-shakingly dumb. I'm kind of speechless at how badly Elon Musk has been handling this entire thing. There was a lot of people talking, I think in the UK, about there are laws about the kind of notice that companies are required to give and things like that. This is just one of Musk's many massive stumbles since coming in, and, it's like, is he trying to drive this into the ground? So meanwhile, since he took over Twitter, Tesla, their market cap has shed $250 billion. This is from Yahoo Finance. Brian Sazi breaks down the stat of the day, showing how Elon Musk's Twitter venture has shaken Tesla investors. Like, the performance has been so bad. And since Musk offered to buy Twitter on April 14, shares of Tesla have tanked 40%. Looked at another way, about $250 billion in Tesla's market cap has gone up in smoke. That's despite the electric vehicle leader serving up a relatively sizzling third quarter earnings report. I don't know what to say, but it continued with another thing about him openly threatening advertisers. So there's a tweet from a Mike Davis here. Dear Elon Musk, you have nearly 114 million Twitter followers. Name and shame the advertisers who are succumbing to the advertiser boycotts so we can counter-boycott them. And get your $8 monthly subscription going ASAP so we can start to make up for lost revenue now. Musk replies, says, thank you. A thermonuclear name and shame is exactly what will happen if this continues. So basically they're saying, some advertisers are being advised by the people who place their ads to stop advertising on Twitter. And then Musk is like, hey, what if we sent a digital lynch mob against you? The replies to this one were grand. Astonishingly, jaw-droppingly dumb move. There's one retweet of mine down at the bottom. Do you know how many homes you could have heated if you just lit $44 billion on fire directly? So this is what's going on at Twitter, and it's just rapid fire. But anyway, speaking of things that are going on Twitter and the kind of stupidity that you can find there, let's segue into some election stuff. Now, I put this up on the YouTube community tab recently. And where did I put this now? Cernovich talking about, well, I don't know where I put that one. But basically, was it this? No, it wasn't this. Anyway, you've seen it if you've been over on the community tabs at the S4A YouTube. But basically, somebody's saying, well, wait a minute. And this came out of this thread of the, Musk openly threatening advertisers who stop paying Twitter money. It's just, God, you can't make this stuff. Like, who would ever want to get into a new relationship with Twitter if that's the way that they're treating people? It's so bizarre. But anyway, somebody's like, I guess Mike Cernovich was calling these companies Marxist or like pushing a Marxist agenda because they don't want to be caught up with somebody who's going to be like doxing them and stuff. And somebody replied to Cernovich just being like, these are capitalist companies that are, trying to figure out where to spend their capital, basically. Why are you calling them Marxist? And he just replied literally with a copy of Animal Farm. And it's just like, so, my take on that is as we look at the left and the Democrats and the Republicans and the status quo being perpetuated over and over again, this is the level of understanding of capitalism that's held by many of its most ardent defenders. You get people like Cernovich, like, well, it's just like Animal Farm, It's just like Joe Orville's 1776 Animal Farm. What did they call it? Anime Farm? Anyway, it would be really funny if it wasn't these are the people actually running the country and their agents, putting out messaging on their behalf. So basically, every day that you listening to this, listening to a socialist channel, you being a at least semi-class conscious worker, don't organize in a left party or organization. It's another day that you hand to these people, not because they're omnipotent, but because you couldn't be bothered to get organized. So, as I've said before, start wherever there is some organization, even if it's DSA, Greens, PSL, IWW, whatever is active in your area. I named some of the larger ones right there. Meet other local leftists and network. Find out what other projects are going on. Because even if you go to a Greens or a DSA, I would bet you anything that many other people involved with that organization are involved in many other community projects. So meet them, form relationships with them, find out what else is going on, and get involved in something that speaks to you as something that you can help build. Everybody has their own strengths and their own level of experience and confidence, and some people have leadership skills, some don't. Some people have vision skills, some don't. Some people just have a lot of energy and, are really good at implementing things. And whatever it is, as I was saying before, find the left that you have, work with it and improve it. This isn't like get involved with the Democrats and pull them left. It's go to the left and help make it better. Now, understand, of course, that the U.S. left has been anti-communist for a long time. I think that there are signs that could possibly change with, by the end of the decade, we could have a significantly less anti-communist U.S. left. But I mean, it has been anti-communist for a long time, and you just have to understand that going in. As, these are the conditions we're dealing with. They can be changed, but they can't be changed if you don't understand them or you refuse to accept them. Things like that. But yeah, you have to get to know the left that you have and understand that, like, what a lot of people have been sold as the sort of unifying, motivating force in this country is basically white supremacy. I mean, U.S. is a settler colonial project. It's also imperialist. So you get a lot of sort of group bonding in the dominant society around messages of opposing other countries or opposing subsets of the population within the country. And so, a lot of people bear the hallmarks of those chauvinist ideas and racist ideas, fascist ideas, and they even bring them into the left in varying degrees. We have to fight that, and that's why we hold consistently anti-fascist and anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-imperialist positions. Again, the more that we can bring the left in that direction, the better. Will we be able to achieve revolution? Well, revolution is ultimately the only way that we'll be able to consistently defend and hang on to whatever reforms we get under capitalism. Because, like I said before, no matter what, they can yank them away whenever their system gets into danger. The only way that they can't do that is if it's not their system anymore. So ultimately, that is the aim. Are we going to be able to do that in the U.S.? Well, there's been a lot of ink spilled on the subject of, revolutionary potential in the first world, and particularly in the settler colonial imperialist United States, which is so backwards, so fascist. Um, you know, at a minimum, we can make the left much more anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and internationalist. Not national chauvinist, etc. I mean, that can be a starting goal. Obviously, organizing for revolution is the aim. Obviously, this society is not spontaneously organizing for revolution. So that doesn't seem to be on their minds. I think that a lot of work, a lot of consciousness has to be raised before the U.S. as a society is anywhere remotely near that level. But we can set interim goals of decreasing the amount of nationalism, racism, general chauvinism, and making a stronger anti-fascist and anti-imperialist coalition. But even doing that means understanding that, for example, the Democratic Party is not anti-fascist in any meaningful way because they collaborate regularly with the Republican Party. They're part of the system, have been for 200 years. So that's, trying to make a more effective anti-fascist left means you must DemExit. This is not optional, and so on. So, speaking of the elections in the United States, if you're familiar with the Princeton study on democracy, I'll put a link to it. I'll put a link to all this stuff. Basically, with an 80 to about 97% degree of accuracy, depending on the type of seat, whether it's a Senate seat or a House seat or a governorship, most of the high offices in the U.S. are won by the candidate who spends the most money. This means that in the USA, most elections effectively are bought. And then once the candidates are in office, there is no statistical correlation between public opinion and public policy. There is, however, a statistical correlation between donor opinion, that is, the rich capitalists who are spending thousands and thousands of dollars on these candidates. There is a correlation between their opinions and public policy. So money, it doesn't buy seats with a 100% degree of accuracy, but with a great degree, 80 to 95-ish percent accuracy, you can buy an election. And then whoever pays these people the most money, I mean, obviously that's how they get reelected, their opinions and their policies are the ones that get pushed. I mean, this system is set up basically to maintain and expand the interests of capital in the first place. It's a government of and for capitalists. And, that's all it's really going to do in the end. But people need to be aware, and we can keep advancing this message and pulling more people over to it. I feel like a lot of it breaks down when people say, okay, but what do we do? And then you say, well, you have to unplug from the Democratic Party. No, I can't do that. People get really scared when you start. No, but doesn't that just mean that we're going to be irrelevant? Well, supporting the Democrats is irrelevant also. It's not going to get you anything you actually want. And it's going to get you into a mindset of settling for utter crumbs. So getting a few more progressive Democrats in Congress, that's achieved nothing, and it never will. The only point of winning seats from a socialist perspective in a capitalist government is to advance class consciousness for the broader class struggle. It's not to chase reforms for comfort. Again, the Democrats would rather lose elections than ally with the left. So we need to break off, form a left coalition out of all the parties and organizations and unions wishing to fight this system, and organize for revolution, because, again, even hanging on to the reforms that we've gotten so far, the only way you can ultimately enshrine those is by completely changing the system. People just aren't organizing for that, and so they blow around in the wind of, like, this year the Democrats are in, this year the Republicans are in. And, the Democrats and Republicans are, again, funded by the same rich interests that want to keep you in this state of forever being off balance, of forever being vulnerable, of forever being anxious about, oh no, the Republicans are going to get in. And then on the Republican side, oh no, the Democrats are going to come and, like, castrate my kindergartner, or whatever they fucking believe at this point. So obviously we need to break out of the system. A lot of people get really hung up on this point. If you've moved on from that fear, then you need to go out there and organize separately from this, organize to fight the Democrats, not to join them. And you cannot fight them from inside. The whole point of this is to create spaces and organizations for proletarian organizing. Because party building is not winning elections. Party building is party building. Okay, coalition building is coalition building. It's about building networks of people who are on the same page, in communication with each other, advancing the ideas, reaching out to more and more people, pulling them into the network. Winning elections is like a tenth of the overall thing that you're doing. It's about strategizing for the broad class struggle, and again, the only point really of getting seats is in service of that, not to, the SOCDEM error is that you're going to just reform the capitalist government into behaving itself. That's a fundamental error. So the seats that you get in the government should mostly be used to show how the government doesn't work for working people, and it never will, and we need a new system. Get what you can and propagandize off of those reforms, especially when they threaten to take them away or they don't implement things that people voted for in direct ballot referendums and things like that. But I do think that left candidates should run. It helps to advertise the party. A lot of people heard, for example, of PSL because of the fact that they ran in 2020 or things like that. This is not to say like PSL is the best party in the world, but it is effective. I think that having those options out there, whether you win the seat or not, we need to build this movement. We need to build the parties, and we need to build a coalition. Unless you want to be dangling from the Democrat-Republican string for the rest of your life. I don't. And, this is the direction we need to go in. Anyway, let's look quickly, speaking of elections, at some stuff that is going on. So in Brazil, Lula beat Bolsonaro, and Lula's a social democrat, but better than Bolsonaro. This is less of like a Biden versus Trump thing. Like Lula's more of an actual social democrat, still, capitalist and still prone to a lot of the non-internationalist, they sent troops to Haiti, for example, a while back. All of those problems that SOCDEMs have, still better than Bolsonaro, who's literally like got a gallon of like gasoline in one hand, like please go burn down the rainforests with me, matches in the other. So anyway, for folks outside Brazil, here's what's happening in the country after Bolsonaro's loss. A big chunk of his base has been gathering outside military headquarters across Brazil and begging the army for a military intervention, aka coup. It's a total state of social hysteria. You can find a lot of videos on this, and I want to check that out. Also, so Benjamin Netanyahu got back in Israel. I thought this was over, but no, he's back. And he's getting all the praise that you would expect. So you've got Zelensky there. Congrats to Netanyahu on winning the elections. It's always important to see real democracy in action. I retweeted this with just, there's so much happening here. Israel and Ukraine share common values. I'm sorry, sharing common values with Israel is not really a bragging point. Share common values and challenges that now require effective cooperation. We hope to open a new page in cooperation with the new Israeli government for Ukraine and Israel's benefit. Netanyahu is some of the worst in a really bad overall settler colonial government, imperialist outpost in the Middle East. That is Israel. They're committing genocide and enforcing an apartheid state against Palestinians. And, here's Zelensky just bending over backwards to kiss Netanyahu's ass and be like, we have so many people to oppress together. And he was getting, Viktor Orban, Narendra Modi, and who else were out there praising him here? I see Giorgia Meloni there on the left, Mike Pompeo on the right, Ted Cruz was also crooning over this. So this was not a great election cycle in many different ways. Also, I believe for however excited the Democrats were about this or that, I guess exceeding expectations, I believe there's a runoff happening for Senate in Georgia, but I believe that they lost both the House and the Senate. So I mean, it's sort of bizarre the any sort of celebration going on right now, but that seemed to be the tone when I was checking in on it. But speaking of Giorgia Meloni, I mentioned before that November 9 is a holiday. So retweeting Itagen there, who has collaborated with Bestie Marx on some of the neo-fascism in Italy thing. So there's a thread there. Today, the Italian government decided to proclaim victory over communism by announcing that November 9 is going to be Freedom Day. This came in the form of a letter from the current Minister of Education and Merit, and it was distributed in all schools. And then they do out the whole letter, translated into English in the thread. So I retweeted it. November 9 is currently the International Day Against Fascism and Antisemitism, but the new fascist Italian government is trying to make it Freedom Day, a day against communism, communists being the only people to stand up against fascism consistently. So, whenever these neo-fascist governments go out there, you always get the sort of Jimmy Dore, left-right alliance people. How is that fascist? They're just being populist. Well, one of the first things they're doing is they're trying to delete the International Day Against Fascism. I would call that fairly fascist myself. That would be something definitely in the interest of a fascist-aligned group to try to do that. Anyway, I'll put a link. You can check out all of the content of that letter there. So, when I say that there is an international far-right convergence going on, this is some of the stuff that I'm talking about with it. So anyway, the next thing that I have lined up is to look at some of the midterm issues, what was on people's minds. Actually, before we get into that, let's just get into a few of the odds and ends that were passed today, which actually, again, are pretty good, some of them. And where were we? There it is. So Vermont, Michigan, and California all enshrined, it says enshrined, that's funny, enshrined abortion rights in their constitutions today. Absolutely massive victories. These are good things because, it occurs to me that more of the political fights may be going on at a state level at this point as far as laying the groundwork for more of a left shift. And again, there's so much just the Democrats block things, the Republicans block things. People are to the left on many issues of both of these 1% funded and controlled parties, and we need to move beyond them somehow. Use every tool possible to get it on record and to raise support and to raise consciousness for these things. And I see the ballot initiatives as being a pretty useful tool. You don't have to wait for somebody else to do these things. If they oppose it, you can again propagandize off of that. It is a tool that you see things happening on the state level to get some things actually done where, again, just building momentum for left activists to actually do something. Instead of, what happens when we stand around is we wind up turning on each other. We have a long way to go to build up to where we're really going to be in a position to get serious power, etc. In the meantime, we need to build up to that point by doing things like this. So that's abortion. Also looking quickly at the cannabis situation. So this was from before the election. There were a number of states which voted on the cannabis measures. Basically, let's just skip ahead to the results. And, I changed the folder that I was pulling screenshots out of, and is it just going to go with the new one? Unbelievable. Where were we? So this is from a website. Oh, boy. What was the name of this website? I can't remember. Anyway, this is just the national results on these different things. So Arkansas voted for marijuana legalization and voted no. Unfortunately, you can see most of the state there. Little Rock voted yes. A couple of the other border areas, it looks like. Otherwise, a lot of the state was majority against. Maryland, however, all but one county went for it, and it passed basically 2-1. So that is now legal in Maryland. We'll see how they implement that. And you're going to hear more clicking because I moved out of this folder one time and now it won't go back. But anyway, Missouri said yes, 53% to 46% no. North Dakota, again, that's a mostly red map, and unfortunately they did vote no, so that's still something that people will be getting locked up for there for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And finally, South Dakota voted no. Colorado, this was psychedelics legislation. Prop 122, Decriminalization and Regulated Access Program for Certain Psychedelic Plants and Fungi Initiative ballot question. And that passed. It was slim, 51% to 49%. But it did pass, and you can see there was support for that in a lot of counties. So that's exciting news. This is also good because, so I mentioned that cannabis and some of these other things like psilocybin are Schedule 1. What does Schedule 1 mean, and is it appropriate? So like cannabis is still Schedule 1 in the United States. It means basically three things. It means that there's high potential for abuse, no medical use, and it's unsafe to use even with medical supervision. So you can see how that applies to like heroin, other like opiates, that high potential for abuse, no medical use. I mean, you could still use heroin as an anesthetic, but again, it's so addictive and so unsafe even under medical supervision, which is the third criterion, that would be on that list. Cannabis. Is there a high potential for abuse? I would say most people, it depends how you define abuse. Most people who use it do not severely abuse it. Two, and again, keeping in mind alcohol is, again, not Schedule 1. Also, the second one, that there is no medical use. Well, is there no medical use for cannabis? No. Right there on its face. That's wrong. And then third, is it unsafe even under medical supervision? No. So there's no reason, there's no science-based reason, there's no medicine-based reason why cannabis should still be Schedule 1. The other problem, when things are Schedule 1, it can be exceedingly difficult to get permission to do research on it. Again, because of that third criterion, that these things are categorized as unsafe even under supervision. So trying to study, for example, the effects of psilocybin on mental health as a possible treatment for alcoholism, for PTSD, things like that. If you want to learn more about that, go to MAPS.org, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They have a lot of interesting and I think potentially very positive research coming out of there. It's very hard to get the permission to study it because you have to possess it to administer it in the study. And if you don't get permission to do that, then your whole study is illegal and you can risk going to jail. So anyway, any step towards this is a positive one, and that was a good thing. Now, on the third thing about the prison labor, there's a little bit of a backstory on this. Some people are going to know some of this already. But basically, what did I save this as? Prison. Makes sense. There we are. Slavery through prison labor is on the ballot for voters in 5 U.S. states. The effort is part of a national push to amend the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that banned enslavement or involuntary servitude, except as a form of criminal punishment. So what is the state of this current? And first of all, let's look at what are the... hold on. I got to take a second to just figure out, is there a reason it keeps going back to that folder? Because, boy, is that... There we go. I got it come out of the right folder. I don't know why. Much better. I don't even know what I did, but it fixed it. So just going into this story a little bit, more than 150 years after slaves were freed in the U.S., and again, this wasn't all around slavery, this was racialized, so, racism is how capitalism perpetuates itself in the U.S. It's a major thing undergirding capitalism, It's important for our socialism to also be specifically anti-racist and not try to downplay this as like, quote, liberal idpol. Absolutely is not. Anyway, voters in 5 states will soon decide whether to close loopholes that led to the proliferation of a different form of slavery, forced labor by people convicted of certain crimes. None of the proposals would force immediate changes inside the state's prisons, though they could lead to legal challenges related to how they use prison labor, a lasting imprint of slavery's legacy on the entire United States. So basically, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution after the Civil War still allowed for involuntary servitude as a form of criminal punishment. And so this has led to labor exploitation, exploiting the labor of convicted felons. So, quote, the idea that you could ever finish the sentence, slavery's okay when, has to rip out your soul. And I think it's what makes this a fight that ignores political lines and brings us together because it feels so clear, said Bianca Tylek, executive director of Worth Rises, a criminal justice advocacy group pushing to remove the amendment's convict labor clause. You're looking for orgs to get involved with. There's another one right there. There's stuff going on everywhere. Nearly 20 states have constitutions that have language permitting slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishments. In 2018, Colorado was the first to remove the language from its founding frameworks by ballot measure, followed by Nebraska and Utah 2 years later. So, again, this is how they're getting some movement going. This November, versions of the question go before voters in Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, and Vermont. So a lot of people don't really know that much about this. Let's read a bit more background. So this is a report from the ACLU, Captive Labor Exploitation of Incarcerated Workers. And this is kind of a summary of a longer report. Our nation incarcerates more than 1.2 million people in state and federal prisons, and 2 out of 3 of these incarcerated people are also workers. In most instances, the jobs that these nearly 800,000 incarcerated workers have look similar to those of millions of people working on the outside. But there are 2 crucial differences. Incarcerated workers are under the complete control of their employers, and they have been stripped of even the most minimal protections against labor exploitation and abuse. A new ACLU report, Captive Labor Exploitation of Incarcerated Workers, explores the use of prison labor nationwide. Here's what we found. Forced to work and stripped of standard workplace protections. Prison Labor Report Survey. 70% said that they were not able to afford basic necessities with their prison wages. 64% said that they felt concerned about their safety while working. 70% said that they received no formal job training. 76% report being forced to work or else face additional punishment, such as solitary confinement, etc. I skipped a page. From the moment they enter the prison gates, incarcerated people lose the right to refuse to work. This is because the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution has its exceptions, etc. The roots of modern prison labor can be found in the ratification of this exception clause at the end of the Civil War, which disproportionately encouraged the criminalization and effective re-enslavement of black people during the Jim Crow era, with impacts that persist to this day. Today, more than 70... okay, we covered some of that, just trying to move through this swiftly. So here's the next graphic. Incarcerated workers are paid pennies as prisons and state governments reap the benefits. So there's the minimum wages for incarcerated workers in each state. They can range from 0 to 35 cents. Incarcerated workers typically earn little to no pay at all, and with many making just pennies an hour, they earn on average between 13 cents and 52 cents per hour nationwide. Wages remain stagnant for years, even decades. In 7 states, incarcerated workers are not paid at all for the vast majority of work assignments. Yet even these abysmal wages are not theirs to keep. The government takes up to 80% of these wages for room and board, court costs, restitution, and other fees like building and sustaining prisons. So it's used to help build more prisons. These wage deductions generally leave incarcerated workers with less than half of their gross pay. So you were going to have $4, now you have $2. Workers are left with even less disposable income because prison systems charge incarcerated people exorbitant costs for basic necessities, like phone calls to loved ones, hygiene products, and medical care. So that's like the prices in the commissaries are like ridiculous. Almost 70% of surveyed incarcerated workers said that they were not able to afford basic necessities with their prison wages. Because incarcerated workers' wages are so low, families already struggling from the loss of income when a family member is incarcerated must step in to financially support an incarcerated loved one. Families with an incarcerated loved one spend $2.9 billion a year on commissary accounts and phone calls, and more than half of these families are forced to go into a debt to afford these costs. At the same time, incarcerated workers produce real value for prison systems and state governments, the system's primary beneficiaries, although they also work in private businesses, and we'll cover that in a minute. Nationally, incarcerated workers produce more than $2 billion per year in goods and more than $9 billion per year in services for the maintenance of the prisons. So there's that. More than 80% of prison laborers do prison maintenance work, which offsets the costs of our bloated prison system. Many prison workers are assigned to general janitorial duties like sweeping or mopping. Others are assigned to grounds maintenance, food prep, laundry, and other work to maintain the very prisons that confine them. Another 8% of incarcerated workers assigned to public works projects, maintain cemeteries, school grounds, and parks, do road work. So this used to be, these kinds of jobs used to be big bulwarks against unemployment. And now they're being worked by people who are locked up. They do road work, construct buildings, clean government offices, clean up landfills and hazardous spills, undertake forestry work, and more. So they didn't mention firefighting, but that's, oh, here it is. At least 30 states explicitly include incarcerated workers as a labor resource in their emergency operations plans for disasters and emergencies. Incarcerated firefighters also fight wildfires in at least 14 states. This was a big thing in California. Kamala Harris was saying, oh, we can't release people from prison. Who's going to fight the fires? Now vice president. Without a single delegate, by the way. State-owned businesses employ 6.5% of incarcerated workers and produce over $2 billion in goods and services sold to other state entities annually. Less than 1% of workers are assigned to work for private companies, which generally offer higher pay, but are still subject to exorbitant wage deductions. So this is, anyway, they continue. Prison policy should not be driven by a desire for cheap labor. While prison labor is not a driving force behind mass incarceration in the U.S., I would say it's not a driving force today. Will it be in 10 or 20 years? It could be. When incarcerated people are used for cheap labor, there is a risk that our criminal justice policy will be hijacked by the desire to grow or maintain this captive labor force. I'd say it already has. I mean, the private prisons were like Corrections Corp. This was known as the growth industry in the 2000s in the United States. So this is the kind of groundwork that they're laying for the future of neoliberalism as it just, goes into a more and more overt fascist state. Dangerous work conditions and preventable injuries. So majority say that they received no formal job training and they worry about their day-to-day safety while working. Prisons don't keep good records on the number of incarcerated workers injured on the job, but California reported more than 100 injuries in its state prison industry program over a 4-year period. Because of poor data collection, this number likely underestimates the true impact. So the pandemic made things even worse, so this is worth reading. Given the vast power disparity between incarcerated people and their employers, incarcerated workers are an exceptionally vulnerable labor force. These workers were especially vulnerable to exploitation during COVID, which is still ongoing. So past tense, not so much. As most of the country stayed at home, incarcerated people faced brutal working conditions. Many reported being forced to continue working and were threatened with solitary confinement and having their parole dates pushed back if they refused to work. Workers in at least 40 states were forced to produce masks, hand sanitizer, and other personal protective equipment during early pandemic lockdowns as COVID-19 tore through prisons, even as they often lacked access to these protective tools themselves. Others were forced to launder bedsheets and gowns from hospitals treating COVID-19 patients, transport bodies, build coffins, and dig graves. Nearly a third of incarcerated people have contracted COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. More than 3,000 have died due to overcrowding, lack of access to virus mitigating tools like masks and vaccines, and inadequate access to health care. Yet even as COVID-19 turned prison sentences into death sentences due to COVID, 16 states denied incarcerated essential workers early access to vaccines. So, dead-end jobs, getting near the end here. Most prison workers surveyed by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 70%, said that the most important reason for working is to develop skills that they can use to build careers after their release. But the prison labor programs fail to provide incarcerated workers with transferable skills. In other words, you can do them there on the spot, but they're not going to transfer to outside. In reality, the vast majority of work programs in prisons involve menial or repetitive tasks, and prison industry's jobs and vocational training programs are declining nationwide, while maintenance jobs increasingly represent a larger share of work assignments. Formerly incarcerated people are released with little money and face barriers to employment, including discrimination and state occupational licensing restrictions that bar people with conviction records from work in the very fields that they trained in while incarcerated. The majority of incarcerated people wish to be productive while in prison. They want and often need to earn money to send home to loved ones and pay for basic necessities while incarcerated. They want to acquire skills useful for employment after their release. Studies show that people who had some savings when they left prison and got jobs after their release were less likely to recidivate, that is, reoffend, than those who did not. Prison work that provides meaningful experience and skills rather than pure punitive exploitation is in all our best interest. Yet despite the potential for prison labor to facilitate rehabilitation, the existing system very often offers nothing beyond coercion and exploitation. That needs to change. There are calls for guarantees for the same labor and wage protections as everyone else, because you can't support this for any reason as a socialist, because all this does is undermine labor standards. It gives capitalists an incentive to lock up more people, maybe you, maybe a family member, to use them as cheap labor, because you know that they're constantly looking for cheaper resources, cheaper labor, and if they have to lock people up to get it, they will do that. And if they have to lock people up to undermine the overall class struggle, they will do that. And that undermines it in many different ways, whether it's directly locking up activists or it is, breaking strikes through basically prison labor. The thing about having them wash hospital infected bed sheets, that I hadn't heard that before, but so this is what they're going to do. We have to get rid of the system. Never underestimate the depravity that the system will sink to. Anyway, continuing, this includes minimum wage, health and safety standards, the ability to unionize. And by the way, the IWW has something, there is an incarcerated workers caucus or something like that. I've heard of that. I think another union or organization is doing a similar thing, trying to organize. Prison organizing is a huge thing that needs to happen in the United States. Do find out whatever you can about that. Anyway, protection from discrimination and speedy access to redress when their rights are violated. We must raise incarcerated workers' wages and limit wage deductions. By paying incarcerated workers the state minimum wage, they will be able to pay for necessary expenses like child support, phone calls home, and commissary costs, while supporting their families and saving for eventual re-entry into society. Prison workers deserve dignity. They should be properly paid for the work they perform, and we should be investing in programs that provide incarcerated workers with marketable skills that will help them find employment after release and eliminate barriers to employment and release. And we must abolish the 13th Amendment exclusion that allows slavery and involuntary servitude as a punishment. So there's the full report. Anyway, some more background on what's going on here. A lot of people outside the United States and a lot of people inside the United States who just don't know can't really fathom how bad the system is. But it's so people committed crimes, but you don't give up all the rights that you've ever had when you do that. And socialists can't be supporting stuff like this at all. So this is going to be another depressing point of fighting with the right-wing U.S. left about it, because even the U.S. left is much more right-wing than they would care to admit. But the fact is, supporting this overly harshly punitive system that allows for slave labor, etc. This only undermines the class struggle, and it's not in our interest whatsoever. All right, let's take a pause here and go back into the chat before we go into. I think I'll probably end up today with the points about the surveys from Pew Research about what was on people's minds for the midterms. But it's been a while since I went back into the chat, so let's just get caught up there. All right. 41 people in the chat. I didn't remind people not to argue with trolls, but we actually have a mod now, so things are in good hands. We actually have 2 mods, but one of them shows up consistently. That wasn't a dig on the other mod, but all right. Anyway, where were we here? Daily Stoner got in the way of everything and made me worse off, especially with getting stuck with an abusive roommate. Yeah, I mean, nobody said use cannabis daily. Really, using a lot of things daily is not necessarily the best thing to do there. So, but again, the question is, should we lock people up for it? And the answer should always be no. On zlib, the Onion server is still up, I think. Yeah, you have to log in for that one. And I think, I don't know if they charge people or what, but anyway. Building local communist libraries sounds good. Afraid to be targeted by local cops. Yeah, I mean, there always have been little radical libraries and info shops here and there. That's kind of a U.S. left tradition. I'm sure it's a left tradition in other places as well. With the internet now, I mean, it does seem like a lot of these things have gone virtual with like Discord reading groups or, other places sort of putting together reading lists and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, it may or may not be worth the resources. If there's already a community center that's hosting, space for lots of different groups to get together locally. I mean, throw in a library in the corner that's been kind of a standard thing for a long time. I wish my union would strike. Yeah. I mean, again, it's ultimately about building worker power, and there are many actions that organized workers can take short of striking. We've covered that in some organizing manuals on the channel. There's slowdowns, there's work to rule, there's all kinds of stuff that you can use to kind of monkey wrench things and that are short of an out and out walkout. But and people should become familiar with those. But yeah, when it comes to striking, that makes news, and adjuncting should be abolished. Hire professors with benefits. So one of, I don't even know how to begin framing this. I had a teacher who was an adjunct, and they broke down how much they actually got paid, and it was ridiculous. And they got paid the same. It was like $3,000. It was like for the entire term, that's what they got paid. And that was going to be the same amount of money whether they had 10 students or 50 students. So, I mean, that's a lot more papers to grade and whatever else. And it's like, here's your, $3,000 gross to pay. And I know somebody who adjuncts at 3 schools, they still cannot make ends meet. Yeah. I was, I've said this before, I was considering looking at PhD programs. I ultimately kind of decided to do this channel instead because I wanted to do reading and like there was learning and study I wanted to do. And, of course, teaching is also a thing that many, doctoral students do as they're doing their own studies. Honestly, doing this channel, I get to do it a lot more on my own schedule. There are drawbacks, obviously, of not being in a formal program, but not going, tens and tens of thousands of dollars into debt and being able to do it much more tailored to my own interests, and having it, having there be no censorship and have it reach this potentially much wider audience. Those were all benefits. But yeah, that was part of where S4A came out of. Was I was considering doing a doctoral program, and instead, this is the format it came out in instead. So there was a big teachers' union strike last week in Canada. The Ontario Premier was going to make strikes illegal. He got so much flack he had to walk it back. Many unions participated. It was nice to see. That's awesome. In Myanmar, garment factory workers are being forced to walk around on their knees all day if they can't meet quotas. They tried to strike, but the factory bosses came in with soldiers and cops to beat them up, fired all the strike leaders. This type of stuff happens every day here. Is that being covered in your press at all? I would love a link on that. That sounds like it needs amplification. Musk is completely insufferable and stupid. Even among billionaires, he is uniquely disgusting. Yeah, well, he is the richest one, so I think you get extra powers of, negative charisma points when you get to that stage. He has to be sinking Twitter on purpose. I mean, it would seem to be in the capitalist class's interest to sink like places where discussions of left politics are happening. Twitter has for a while been the sort of most overall liberal, progressive, socialist. Like Facebook is Boomerville, and it's literally run by Republican activists. Of the big social media things, it's probably the place where it's easiest to have an actual left conversation. Um, and yeah, I'm sure that they don't want that. Not that like that alone is sort of bringing the revolution, but I found a lot of shit through Twitter I would never have found otherwise. So yeah, I mean, syncing Twitter would cut off access to a lot of things. People are talking about Mastodon. I remember like I was gonna sign up for that a while ago. It didn't seem worth the effort. It looked kind of confusing. Maybe I didn't give it a chance, but a lot more people were talking about it last week. Twitter is too good of a tool at dividing people. I don't know about that. I think, as people engage in political discussion, they pick sides. And I don't know that it's a tool of dividing people. I think that picking sides is something that happens naturally, and it's on the build up to there being an actual fight over some idea or principle or something. I just saw a TikTok today by an attorney who noted the contract Musk signed had stipulations that severance involves stocks, 2 months' pay, something that is prorated. It's something along these lines. Yeah, he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And people are like, oh no, he knew all that. He was gonna have to give them severance and whatever. Again, it's like you could just light the money on fire directly because that seems to be the direction it's been like a week and a half, and already just all of this hugely negative press, people just out and out mocking him. Like it's normally that liberals are, they will praise rich people when they do stuff that they like. I mean, it's just been overly negative. No one is praising him really, except for like Nazi trolls who are like excited to come back and terrorize Twitter again. But no one sort of is. He's just doing this badly. It's very Trumpian in the sense of like, okay, you're one of us, you're rich, we have to like take you seriously and whatever, but what are you doing? They don't like the style of it because legitimately it's just insane. Yeah, I don't think it's all just one thing. I don't think he's just trying to break Twitter because it's too powerful as an educational tool. I don't know if it's an organizational tool really. But as an agitational and educational tool, it is powerful. I mean, it's in his interest, even on a personal level, to stop people talking about him. You know, I mean, he's involved in different companies that specifically have profit motives and would benefit from being able to capture and control more of the discussion just even happening around those companies, let alone the entire system. So, I mean, I think that, and he may be just trying to make money off of it. I kind of don't think so, though. I do think it's more political, but I don't think it's all one thing. Next comment. Working in a union can be frustrating and rewarding at the same time. And, I think that's a very realistic view. You know why? Because unions are people. And this is kind of a thing of the left in general. We have to realize, like, when we work with other people, we work with other people. People can be frustrating. And, actual democracy in groups of people, it can be challenging. It can also be rewarding and meaningful. But yeah, other people can be really frustrating, for sure. Continuing, it's like a slow burn, especially in a yellow union. I've had to deal with stewards being buddy-buddy with the bosses and useless contract committees and won better conditions and battles regardless. Yeah, I mean, this is why we call it class struggle. It is tough. It's just, I wish it was easier. I wish it was a straighter shot from, to victory. It's really not. It's very difficult. Yeah, and reminder, Animal Farm is a work of fiction. It's not a documentary. Made progress on joining a local party, took time for sure. When you do get in, see if you can help them speed that process up. Responding to new members and bringing in new members is one of the top 2 or 3 things a party needs to be doing. And it's that simple. There's no excuse for taking 3 or 4 months to reply to people who, I mean, do you have something better to do than expand your party? I mean, you may have some really important project in the works, but most of these parties are so small, getting more members would only be helpful. And would help make whatever project you're working on go more quickly in the first place. So, yeah, it's inexplicable to me. Uh, Another comment, I'd argue that the Democratic Party facilitates fascists. Well, yeah, they've been helping to prop up the Republicans and stifling the left for decades. But again, it's the people behind them that fund both parties. No, I would not consider creating a Discord server. I don't use Discord a lot, and so I'd be going out of my way to do it. This comes up all the time, so no. And no, I don't want people creating one in the name of S4A. If we're going to do it eventually, I would like to be involved at this point. I don't use Discord is not part of my flow, so it wouldn't come naturally to me at all. And it's one more thing to moderate. I really have enough on my plate as it is. It doesn't take much to turn a settler colonist mindset, especially the face of police brutality. Um, I'm not entirely sure what that comment means. Well, okay. If you were saying that opposition to the cops is a unifying principle, I would say yes and no. I mean, the more hardcore people support the cops because of the brutality that they do. So it depends. But yeah, I mean, I would say by and large, U.S. cops are absolutely hated, and that is, generally speaking, a unifying force. Although, again, if you try to go into that as a white person and, you know, try to claim the same footing as people who aren't, you don't do that. So yeah, we need coalitions against the police. They should absolutely not be led. They should be supported by white people on the left, but absolutely not led by overall. I mean, does police brutality affect white workers? Yeah, but it's also part of a specifically racist, genocidal system. So, yeah. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that comment was stating. I like the rule of three. So there's one, most money donated wins 95% of races. Well, it's different. The Senate is lower. The Senate, I think, is closer to like 82%. But yeah, upwards of 80% of races. Two, Princeton study on democracy proves public opinion doesn't have any correlation to public policy. And third, oh, I thought this was going somewhere. Yeah, no, it's not flawed logic. The Democrats cannot be taken over from the inside. This has been attempted over and over and over and over and over. And then somebody's trying to compare to Jimmy Dore. Get the fuck out of my chat. Get out. How many times do you want to go around and around and around these circles? Bernie Sanders proved beyond a shadow of a doubt you cannot reform the Democratic Party. Others had attempted this previously. Bernie Sanders really demonstrated this loud and clear. I mean, it's like AOC and the Squad. What have they actually done that is sort of activist in the last few years? Nothing. They get in, now they're just trying to get reelected. And this isn't a thing like taking over the Democratic Party. It just isn't. There's literally no future in trying to change the Democratic Party. None. None at all. Yeah. Thank you, Flashy. Actually, we despise Jimmy Dore. Communists don't want electoralism. We don't view electoralism as an end in and of itself, but as a means to propagate our message to the masses and to build a revolutionary party. Read Lenin's Marxism and Reformism for a short explanation of the Marxist view on reforms. I'll unban you at the end of the chat, but for fuck's sake, I don't know what people are missing at this point to think, as a Marxist, that you even can reform the Democratic Party, let alone turn it into something revolutionary. Now DC people who voted to legalize but can't set up stores can go buy in Maryland. Yeah. Slavery was banned this year. Yeah, and only 20% of people in Tennessee voted against it. Or voted for slavery. In Oregon, actually, I think I have a screenshot of this. In Oregon, the turnout was not as good. Do I have a screenshot of this? In Oregon, 45% of people voted to hold on to that. No, I don't have a screenshot. Or do I? What's this? Yeah, there it is. Tennessee amendment prohibits slavery. 80% yes. 20% nah, keep slavery. And then in Oregon, down there at the bottom, Measure 112, modify Constitution to remove slavery or involuntary servitude as a punishment. 46% said do not remove. Oregon, again, set up as a basically whites-only society in the first place. We've covered that in the past. And to this day, Northwest Territorial Imperative is a neo-Nazi project trying to take over the Pacific Northwest and set up basically like a, fascist ethno-state up there. I'll leave that up. Yes, Prop 308 in Arizona also passed, allowing students to get financial aid for college regardless of immigration status. That is good. Arizona voted to cap interest on medical debt at 3%. Jesus. You have prisoners being forced to fight forest fires due to climate change. This whole system is in shambles. I mean, it really is. I think we will look back on this time as like a real dark ages. There is still an anti-slavery position to this day, and it is the prison abolition movement. Prison apologists are class traitors, as most prisons are privately owned as well as pro-slavery. Poverty and crime are big business, and if you want safe streets, organize for jobs, homes, and schools. Every day the government are defunding and privatizing schools in Chicago at the behest of that oligarch class that socialists keep going on about. Yeah. Absolutely. Notice how the lowest paid incarcerated workers were in the black belt in that graph. Yeah, the former Confederacy. I mean, if you look up basically any social statistic, any social indicator, it's just still so backward in the old Confederacy. Whether it's like allowing corporal punishment in schools, like name a thing, it tends to be worse in that area. Not anti-justice. Well, yeah, this isn't a justice system in the first place. That's part of the point. Not anti-justice. They just understand that crime prevention is 10 times better than punitive measures, and rehabilitation for those who have committed a crime, even when that crime is violent in nature and not just some recreational activity criminalized by private prisons for slave labor. Yeah, the prison system in the United States. Here, I think I have a graphic which tells a decent story about this. And save it under Reagan. Where is it? Huh. What is this? Oh, no, this was another story. Nothing will be the same. A prison town weighs a future without a prison. After a decade of efforts that reduced inmate populations, California is closing prisons. A town whose economy is built on incarceration wants to keep one open. And of course, legendary Wint. I put years of hard work into getting my torture degree at torture college. Now everyone's like, oh, torture's bad. It's ineffective. Fuck off. That's, yeah. There's another one along these lines. Actually, yeah, so Luna Oy covered this a while ago. Arizona communities would, quote, collapse without cheap prison labor, corrections director says. This is from Jimmy Jenkins, Arizona Republic, July 14. So this is like, again, what I was saying about Kopmala, oh, we can't get rid of the prisons. Who's going to fight the fires? I don't know, firefighters? Maybe not people like literally threatened with solitary confinement if they don't go do it, who are like untrained. But this is the United States. People need to wrap their heads around what's going on here. It's horrifying. I get why people are shy about learning the details of what's going on there, but it's horrific. The next thing you know, some idiot will be like, Elon Musk should buy all private prisons and innovate them. Heard it here first. I could see that happening. No, actually, it's too much work. It's too much work. He wouldn't be into something like that. Understanding basic supply and demand economics, one can conclude that the existence of private prisons presupposes the existence of crime and incentivizes recidivism. Nothing is going to change. I mean, the interest of this system is to perpetuate itself. It's to perpetuate the class rule of the capitalists and to keep capitalism running and expanding at peak profitability for as long as it possibly can. That is what always comes first and foremost. If you don't want that, there is only one thing you can do. It is organize for an end to the system and for as many reforms as we can possibly manage along the way up to its complete abolition. And to just keep pushing, pushing, pushing. And not to ally with groups or to try to do your organizing within groups which are fundamentally part of upholding the system, such as the Democratic Party is fundamentally part of upholding the system. Have I read Concentration Breakdown by Anthony Leroy? I have not. But I made a note of it here. Let's go back to the Twitch tab. It proves that the rate of profit is close to zero if they have to literally outsource to enslaved labor for every industry. Well, I think it's more about undermining the the rest of us. They know that they can't run the entire society based off of that, but if you have that there, it's a way to. It's just like having the reserve army of the unemployed. It's constantly there to keep wages down and to keep people off balance. An S4A Mastodon server would be next level. I'll look into it. No promises, but that had not even crossed my mind. I'll look into it. Thank you for the suggestion. The capitalist internet has literally made me a communist, lol. You know, I'll tell you some things that probably will also be making people communist. In New York City, they were running drone ads in the sky for Candy Crush, that stupid game. They had like drones up in the sky. So there's talk of like, oh, will the sky over cities be the next in like ad space? I don't think anybody really minds when you see like sometimes in the summer you'll see planes like carrying a banner behind them, like come down to like Joe's Pub, like live rock 8 p.m. or whatever, drinks free till 7 or something like that. Okay, whatever. That's part of festivities. What I don't think people want is to not be able to see the night sky anymore because there are constantly drone ads selling you video games and cigarettes and whatever. But that was a thing that happened this past week. I remember during the George Floyd uprisings, I saw tons of videos on Twitter that would have otherwise been buried, plus a friend of mine found a protest to go to using a Twitter account. That was another major thing, is like, where else are you going to see these videos? Because there is YouTube, but YouTube doesn't interconnect the same way that Twitter does. Like, you can't just like retweet a video in the same way. You can share it on a community post. It's really not the same. Yeah, so somebody says, I get why everybody hates Twitter, but I seem to be the only person who legit enjoys it. I get to see interesting and informative things. I mean, there's a part of it that there's like elements of it that I hate, and there's definitely an art to using it in a way that does not make you completely insane, and a lot of it involves blocking and muting in copious amounts. But yeah, no, there's a ton of stuff you'd never see otherwise on there. That's amazing. S4A bumper stickers, maybe. You know what I would do is I'll make a note of that. That's next to the Mastodon idea. Bumper stickers. Yeah, I'd probably just put designs out there, and then people could, um, print them. Yeah, the inside baseball strategy is just hamster wheel politics. I mean, again, Bernie Sanders, you don't have to go back very far for this. You have to go back 2 years to see you cannot change the Democratic Party. They will throw everything at you to stop you, and that's just within the party. It's a space dominated by capitalist interests. You can't get any. So, again, what I said about building a party means building a party, building a coalition means building a coalition. It's not primarily about winning elections, although that's one thing you can use the party for, but it's about getting people together to organize and get educated for the broad class struggle in the many forms in which that exists. And yeah, you can pursue certain, local or state level positions in places where that makes sense. I was looking at the ballot for where I live. There were a lot of places where positions were being run uncontested. So why is there not a left coalition candidate on every single one of those? It's inexcusable. And again, if for no other reason than to establish a presence. I mean, there are places that are so blue, a Republican can never win them. Like, there are places that Democrats were winning with like 80% of the vote. And like, there's like a couple of farcical Republican candidates running against them. Run a left coalition candidate against them. You're in no danger there of, there's literally no possible objection to it. You're in no danger of the right wing winning at all. And if it's already a, quote, progressive or, quote, liberal, socially liberal population there that's already more, ahead of the curve, they're not, you know what I'm saying, then run a left candidate there and see if you can fight the Democrats. The thing we were talking about if the Democrats would rather lose elections than ally with the left, they could ally with the left and crush the Republicans into the dustbin of history, and that would be that. But that would mean that they would have to, once the Republicans were done, actually contend with the left. Well, in some places, that's effectively already the case. Like, in some places in the United States, in the state governments or whatever, or for certain congressional seats or whatever, the Republican just literally has no chance. Well, then there's absolutely, you're already in that situation where the Republicans have no chance, so you don't even have to worry about that. Why are there not left candidates in every single one of these seats, and why aren't people not supporting that as a real thing to, again, build recognition, to get the message out, to propagandize? Whether you win or not, the point is not to just get in and then, oh, we get the keys to the kingdom, because that's not really how it works. But there's literally no harm in running whatsoever. And yet you see a lot of these seats just not, there's no left candidates there. And I get, yeah, you got to find somebody to run. And like, whether it's, the Greens or PSL or whatever left parties actually do run candidates, because not all of them do. Yeah, you still got to find somebody to run. It's not that hard, though. I have a glitch on my screen saying there are almost 9,500 people watching the stream. Well, I see 40, so I don't know. Pretty sure most prisons aren't privately owned. Well, let's look up. What is the percentage of private prisons USA? This is just a few clicks away. See that we're already on the internet right now. You can just type in the words. Private prisons in the United States, 2021. This is from NICIC.gov. There's another one from sentencingproject.org. NICIC.gov 2021. Private prisons in the United States incarcerated 115,428 people in 2019, representing 8% of the total state and federal prison population. Since 2000, the number of people housed in private prisons has increased 32%, compared to an overall rise in the prison population of 3%. So it has, again, this really started in the 2000s, so like 15 years ago. That was, Corrections Corp in 2006. It was the growth industry. So since 2000, so in the last 20 years roughly, that's increased 32%. I assume it is still increasing. So as of 2022, this is from sentencingproject.org, private prisons in the U.S., August 23rd, very recent, 2022, 26 states and the federal government incarcerated 99,754 people, it's almost 100,000, in private prisons in 2020, representing 8% of the total state and federal prison population. So anyway, there are some statistics on that. And these things are cancer because one of the things, I remember Democracy Now! Had a story on this 5 years ago. There was a big scandal in Pennsylvania where a judge was caught, and they showed video of the judge sentencing some of the kids, and he wasn't even looking at them as he was sentencing them, but he was getting $1 million to send more kids to this private prison because the private for-profit prison gets paid by the government per head to house people, and they get a profit on all of that. And the judge was basically just being bribed to the tune of about $1 million, if memory serves, to just lock more kids up and not give them fair trials. And this was, I forget the name of the judge, I believe it was in Pennsylvania. Yeah, there shouldn't be any of them, but it does seem to be growing. It's horrifying that the ICE detention centers are also privatized. Yeah, absolutely. And, again, we're speaking of Bernie and AOC. What happened to abolish ICE? What happened to defund ICE? What happened to these things? It's on the radar one day, they use it to win elections, and then gone. I also did see ranked choice voting pass in one of the southwestern states. I forget which one. 1-800-END capitalism. There's a nice tweet. Yeah, the space billboard thing. It's got to stop. By the way, in my Twitch channel's Discord, we are building a library of leftist works and other stuff like textbooks so people don't have to purchase them for classes. That's great. And again, these are things that people can do. Like back in the day, there would be cooperatives and mutual aid societies to help comrades, people who were engaged in the struggle in one way or another, of being a bit more comfortable during the struggle, just helping people out in any way that we can. This is, again, a function of building a party, a coalition. You're not going to get that inside the Democratic Party, which is owned by, big pharma people and real estate investors and, the people that own the local hospital or whatever. This is a capitalist dominated space. So organizing for the class struggle, yeah, these kinds of mutual aid efforts are helpful, and whatever else people can do to make things a bit easier so that we survive the struggle and then win it. The S4A collective texting your phone with anti-capitalist messaging. That's something the left coalition could do. You start running a political campaign, you can do all kinds of things which then become legit because of the political campaign. And this could be attempted in, like, again, California. A lot of the districts there, it's completely Democrat dominated. There's no real danger of a Republican winning. You could easily get a left coalition going at 25% without even hurting the Democrats. So you don't even have that objection from people. And you use it to, so here's some things I liked about the Bernie Sanders campaign. What I liked was that he was running ads, and I did donate money. I donated more money in 2016. I actually don't know if I donated money in 2020. But seeing ads go out there talking like that were actually highlighting some struggles poor people were having. Now, obviously, he, at the end of all of this, pissed it all away and took a movement full of people who wanted major change in this country and put them into a party that makes change impossible on a daily basis. That never should have been done. It was criminal of Bernie to not either feed people into the Greens and start that left coalition, or start a Labor Party and welcome people from, who abandoning the Democratic Party, from the Greens, from wherever, and get that, left thing going. Because what we found out from that campaign is that there are stadium-filling crowds basically everywhere wanting major changes. They're not all Marxists yet, but that was a space that, the S4A thing, I started this channel in that context, and I know a lot of the early listeners, some of whom are still listeners, came out of that like, yeah, Bernie talking about socialism, I wanted to find out what that was. I found your channel, and we were having that conversation. It opened up a space for the left to do its thing and to expand, and we did expand. But that dies when you feed it into the Democratic Party, and then everybody's having to talk about Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and all this crap. It'd be better if we actually focused on building worker power of and for working people, not trying to navigate the utterly capitalist dominated Democratic Party. The S4A party, I mean, I hope it doesn't come to that, but who knows? I want to see something happen by the end of this decade, but, there is stuff going on, and there's no need for it. There's stuff going on in everybody's community right now. What you need to do is go out and connect with it and say, hi, I'm a socialist, I'm progressive, I'm a socialist, like, I read a lot about, social change, I'm here to get involved, what can I do? Don't go in there like breathing down their necks with an agenda, but just be like, hey, I'm a socialist, I believe in progressive change, and, I want to help out your organization, how can I help? And get involved for a while, get to know people, let them get to know you. See if whatever project you're in is something that you can build. Talk to people about what else they're involved in. Find a project or two that you can consistently become a part of. And we do also need to organize for political power, so we do need that party. But, having more people in all these organizations and getting them more on the map and getting, ultimately having these organizations and coalitions and projects connect with everyday working people's lives. That's the idea. So that they look to us for answers and advice, and we say, well, yeah, let's organize this way, and we can actually have that advice be informed by theory and history. I mean, this is kind of like the role of the vanguard, because the masses want change and they will spontaneously rebel now and then, but we need to move it beyond just sheer spontaneity into organization and purpose. But yeah, my point is that there's already a lot of stuff going on out there, and just starting at least by getting involved in that can tell us something about what else needs to be done that's not being done already. The PA judge is just like the judge in Nevada, if I recall correctly, who did the same thing. I don't think I heard that story, but it wouldn't shock me. Bernie created a generation of David Pacmans. That's not accurate. David Pacman didn't even support Bernie. He was for Elizabeth Warren. All right. Well, we are. Oh, so the name was Judge Chivarello. He went to jail not for violating child rights, but for not paying taxes. I'll tell you. All right. Let us end here because I didn't even get to the Pew Research stuff yet. We just had kind of a big chat today. We'll come back into this tomorrow and we will keep the coverage going. All right. Thanks to everybody who showed up today for the stream. And, oh yeah, I knew there was something else. Let's thank the patrons. So unfortunately, I don't have an updated patron thing, and I apologize for that. This is most of the people. I might be missing a couple of people. But anyway, thanks to the patrons, patreon.com/socialism for all. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. I've said these words so many times. It's like I want I want to be more spontaneous with the phrasing, and it's just coming out like the way I've said it a million times. Anyway, patreon.com/socialism for all. I would make content if nobody paid, but I wouldn't be able to spend as much time on it. So the support is hugely encouraging. It's been great to see this channel growing. A lot of these people have been here for a long time. The green names have been supporting for 2 years. The yellow names have been supporting for over a year. And yeah, it's just been great to see this. And we will continue on. I haven't been doing as many audiobooks recently. I have not stopped adding audiobooks to the stack. It's just that the way that things have been working out, I've been putting a lot more time into the streams. I mean, there are a lot of audiobooks up on there's like 300 audiobooks up on the channel already. I've been putting more time into the streams. There will still be more audiobooks right now. We are cranking out Anti-During Part 1, chapter by chapter, trying to do 1 or 2 chapters a week of that, and so that we get through it. There's 14 chapters in all. We'll get through that, and then we'll get to Ludwig Feuerbach and the end of history, or whatever that's called. The end of... I'm tired. The end of... Is it the end of classical philosophy? What's the name of that book? The end of classical German philosophy. There we go. End of history. Freaking exhausted. And then Theses on Feuerbach, and then Value, Price, and Profit before we crack into Capital. Actually, no, there's something else before. Oh, Anti-During Part 2, I think. Then Capital, then Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. That's the last 6 things in the basic ML study guide, which I began some 2.5 years ago. And of course, we've covered many, many side readings about that. So somebody asks, I do want to answer this question before we sign off. Have I thought about having a group dedicated to reading audiobooks, uploading those to S4A even when they aren't your voice? So we did a community project last summer, 2021, where I asked people to sign up to do chapters of Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Germany by Engels, 1852. And there were some people who, I'll do chapter 3, 4 days later, boom, here's the link. Very straightforward. there's a lot of other people who signed up for a chapter or two, and then 2 months went by, and then I can't do it. And anyway, as it stands, there are still like 3 or 4 chapters remaining, and this is from a year and a half ago. So, I mean, I appreciate that life comes up and this and that. I had considered, should I ask these people to donate their stuff to the channel? But that wasn't really the point of the project. The point of the project was more to actually encourage people to start their own channels and to just get people, give people a little bit more structured experience in doing something, recording some content, uploading it, just making a contribution of their own rather than me trying to claim that. So, I don't know. I think that channels that do kind of work, should link to each other, that support each other's work and stuff like that. I think at this stage, we're going to keep it. Also, like, I do get money for this channel through, well, the Patreon thing is on the screen. And it would be honestly kind of weird for me to take, if people want to send in a link or something, that's one thing. But I mean, if people are actually generating content for the channel, but, I'm getting like a few hundred a month from the Patreon, that's kind of weird. So, yeah, for all those reasons, I think that this channel is just going to be sort of me producing the content. But I mean, collaborations are another thing. But as far as like having a group dedicated to reading audiobooks, those are some of my thoughts about it. It's not to say it would never happen, but probably under different circumstances. But I appreciate the thought. All right, we're going to sign out, and we'll do this again tomorrow, same time, same place. Thanks again to everybody who showed up in the stream. Really only had one troll, and thanks also to the mod. And yeah, it was a good chat. So, all right, we'll see you then.